Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're waiting for a few more attendees just to sign on because I see the attendance number going up a little bit. So we'll do that. And we'll start this really in 30 seconds. Just so everybody's aware, a couple things we're going to talk about in this demo. Some about how Domotz works. We'll provide some examples of how it gets used, but then this particular demo is a little bit more or this live webinar is a little bit more basic on what are some of the fundamentals of Domotz and how to really get started with Domotz. We'll talk about account creation, things of that nature. All right, so it looks like we're starting to top off here. Before we get started, of course, let's go into some of the basics of Domotz. By the way, my name's JB Fowler, and if you guys have questions around Domotz, by all means, we want you to ask those. Take advantage of the GoToWebinar panel that's here. We do have a team standing by to help answer these questions, so they'll try to answer that immediately in the question section. I do invite Giancarlo, who's our CTO, to interrupt me if there's a question that may be pertinent to what we're talking about at the time. We will, if we have time, we've been finding that these go pretty much right at the hour, but if we have a little bit of time, we'll answer some of the Q&A at the end. And then, of course, if you guys have more technical questions, we always want you to leverage support@domotz.com, where our support engineers are there, and they respond pretty quickly. We're fairly proud of how fast the team responds to that. All that being said, these are the things we want to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about how Domotz works. We'll talk then more about the creation of an account. I assume most of you have done that properly, otherwise you probably didn't get the information about this training, but we'll still address some of that and some of the nuances of that. We'll talk about billing. We'll talk about how to activate an agent, really the types of agents. We'll go into the network setup side of it. We'll talk about some of the fundamentals about when you have devices that have been discovered and how you would set those properties and why you should consider setting them in a certain way or using naming conventions. We'll of course talk about documentation of these devices and the importance of that. We'll talk about how to set up alerts and then some of the basics of remote connectivity. And then we'll give a little bit of an overview of the 201 session. It's important to note that for some of you that are new, we've added so many features and we've gotten requests from our listeners to go into more details about certain features that we ended up having to break up our demos into two different sessions. So we have this 101 session, which is around the basics, and then we talk about a lot more of the more advanced features of Domotz in the 201 session. That being said, because we have so much going on, let's go ahead and get started. A couple things about Domotz and how we see service providers, how we see integrators using Domotz. Domotz fundamentally is a network management solution. We're really there to help you understand what the network itself looks like, from the firewall or the router all the way down into the managed switches and to the network infrastructure, wireless access points included into that. We really help you not only classify what that network looks like, but we also help you diagnose any issues that may be going on in the network at that infrastructure level. But we see a lot of service providers using us for asset management. You'll see that Domotz, when you first started up on your network, does an amazing job of discovering all of the assets, all the network-based devices that are associated with that network, and more importantly, Domotz will actually classify those devices, not only by the make and the model of the device, but also the type. So you really get a good understanding of what's going on in the network and the types of devices that are connected to it. And then we see service providers extracting this information into the documentation tools that they use, whether it's services like IT Glue or IT Portal, whatever it may be that you're using, even Excel. Right, so you have a good understanding of these are all the devices that are connected to the network and how they are connected. Now we also do a really good job of understanding when new devices show up on the network. And this is really, really helpful for cybersecurity purposes. Awareness of what's on that network is one of the core principles of any sort of cybersecurity health or cybersecurity process that you guys are going through, whether it's something like SOC or CMMC or any other sort of ISO-based cybersecurity. Understanding what's on that network is one of the first steps. And Domotz gets used by a lot of service providers and integrators for helping that, not only with their business and their infrastructure, but also, and more importantly, their clients' business. And so you'll see that as we work through Domotz. So how do we do this? What's the core value of what Domotz is? Well, Domotz really is a tool for you as a service provider. And what we're doing in the way we work is by having some of these key elements. One that I've already mentioned is that device discovery and classification. We call it IoT because really anything that's connected to the network, that is, whether it's doing internal services or it's going out to the cloud. Right? Domotz will discover those devices, will classify those, and really bring awareness to you about what those are, which, as I mentioned, is really beneficial for not only documentation, but also cybersecurity health. Once we've discovered all these devices, you'll see that we can do a great job of alerting or proactive monitoring of these devices. You can set alerts on devices, and we'll go into quite a bit of depth on how you do that in this demo, but it's really about helping you better understand the devices that you care about, what's going on with those devices, and the network infrastructure, and monitoring when things go bad. When something does go wrong on that network, you need to be able to securely connect to those devices or that system and that infrastructure, and also being able to manage those devices. So we'll talk about how we do that. And suffice to say, any tool that you are using as a service provider needs to be easy to deploy, it needs to be easy to use, it needs to be able to help you troubleshoot systems. And so that was one of the core principles that Domotz built into the platform. That being said, Domotz really, and you'll see this, is really about helping you as that service provider be more efficient and helping you generate more customer loyalty by helping you know what's going on in your clients' networks and solving problems before the customer ever even knew that there was a problem. Let's get into some examples of all this. So let me open up Domotz. And I guess before I actually get into the examples, let me tell you a little bit about how Domotz itself works. First of all, Domotz is a cloud-based tool. We're hosted on AWS. So we have two databases throughout the world. One is in North America, dealing with a lot of the North American privacy rules and regulations. And then, of course, we have one in Europe as well to deal with GDPR and those privacy issues that are associated with their regulatory rules. Domotz has, and even though we're a cloud-based service, we have what we call tentacles throughout the world that will communicate with that database, so that way you can not worry about performance issues. Any sort of connectivity we have happens really quickly. When we are doing connectivity, it's important to note that the cloud that Domotz has is always communicating with an agent. In fact, these dots that you see on the screen fundamentally are an agent that's sitting on a network and that network is being monitored with that agent. It's the cloud that is securely communicating with that piece of software that's sitting on that network that then tells the network when to do a scan, when to discover devices, when to make a connection. On the screen here, you will see the Domotz desktop app. So I'm running an application that's running on a Mac here, but we've got a Windows-based Mac, a Windows-based application. And then we also have mobile applications. We have web-based applications. So even if you're using some obscure OS, as long as you have a browser, you do have the ability to connect to the cloud and see what the status of all your agents are. It's important to note that Domotz is a very multi-tenant environment. In fact, within my application here, you can see the different agents that I'm looking at. You can see And the benefit of this is you can see tens, hundreds, even thousands of agents in a single pane of glass, a single view, and get a status. Very simple type status, red, yellow, green. So when an agent is red, that means that it's likely offline, no longer communicating with the cloud. When we have an agent that is green, then everything's running as expected. But when it's yellow, that's when we start to see devices, important devices that may be offline, or we may see security issues that we've discovered on the network. That being said, let's look at some examples here, just so you can get an idea of fundamentally how we see service providers using Domotz. So if I go into this Draper site, and before we talk about all the discovery, let's look at a couple key examples here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is really looking at the network infrastructure. So in this example, we've taken, we've created a room called the equipment closet that has a router, it has managed switches in it, it has wireless access points. Domotz has the ability to discover all of this network infrastructure. We can see the different interfaces of these switches, which devices are connected to it. We do that through the discovery of simple network management protocol, and then of course the enrichment of all these devices. But we will interrogate this switch, and we'll start to look at things like bandwidth of these devices. We'll look at errors being or packets being discarded from this switch. We'll track this over time. Of course, when it comes to managed switches and firewalls, the other thing that we do is we can extract the configuration files from these systems and then store them in the cloud. When anything changes with respect to these configuration files, we can show that information and we can do a comparison of what has changed. And of course, we can alert you to when those changes occur. Even if we see the running configuration different from the startup configuration, we can give you alerts to that. So that's some of the network infrastructure stuff that we can do. When it comes to PCs, laptops, and servers, we certainly can see that these devices are online. And in fact, we can connect to these devices even through things like RDP. So we can discover that ports are open on these devices, ports being 3389 in the case of RDP, but even Telnet, SSH, web-based ports, we can connect to those and then create a secure connection through the Domotz cloud and infrastructure. So here now you can see that I'm connected to that Dell server here just through a web browser, and I could log in if we needed to do that. This particular device is offline, but I've got a virtual machine running on that Dell. I have it going through Hyper-V, and I turned it off this weekend, and I should have turned it back on, but my mistake. But if we wanted to create a connection to this device where I've enabled SSH, so I can go in and manage that through a command line interface, I can do that there as well. Recently, Domotz has released the ability, whether it is a Windows machine or you're running a Linux machine, you can unlock these devices and get a lot more information about the operating system itself that's running on that device. And I just haven't taken the time to enable that on this lab setup, but that's something to be aware of too. When it comes to things like NAS drives, so again, we look at this as kind of a network infrastructure device. We're going to tell you that what's up and running on that. We give you the ability to connect to the web portals of those devices, but more importantly, it shows you the power of SNMP and our capabilities to discover sensors that are available on these particular devices. So if I just type this word storage, you'll see the MIBs as well as the OIDs that are available on these particular devices, and we make it really easy for you to add those. I have a couple of these added, so I can just show you how we can look at over time how these sensors are changing. You can see that the storage on this particular NAS drive is fairly maxed out. The reason it fluctuates is because I have an NVR running on this, and so it actively cleans up the data that it needs to, and so you'll see little spikes where it goes down or up as needed. We can set alerts on all these. We can look at CPU utilization on these systems, and we can set up spikes or alerts when we see spikes, excuse me, on the CPU utilization. So lots of power within SNMP. The last thing that I want to show you just from an example perspective, and this is just to bring awareness to you about the possibilities here. Let's go to a different agent. Let's go to this lab here. But it's the ability to be able to log in to a particular site and manage those systems. So if I do a search for these devices, here's a PDU that's on the network, so a power distribution unit. I have the ability to associate network-based devices or even dummy devices to particular outlets on a PDU, and then I can power cycle those directly from the Domotz interface. In fact, even if I knew that I had one of these devices that were in a troubled state, so we'll just type the word kitchen, this is an amplifier here. If I were to look at these devices and type the word kitchen, so I'll find that device, we can see that it's actively connected to a PDU, but I can come into that device and power cycle it directly here. I also have the ability through PoE-based devices. So let's see if I can quickly find probably a touch screen. So we want to find one that has a power port. So here's a touch screen where this is actually connected to a managed switch that's running PoE. I absolutely have the ability to power cycle that there. So through some of these examples, you can see how we can discover the network infrastructure. We can look at NAS devices, right? Network storage devices. We can look at endpoints. We can see really anything about some of these devices, and then we can power cycle them. We can remotely connect into them to manage them. Lots of power within Domotz. Let us look at some of the basics of how we get to this. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is the account creation side. As I mentioned, I assume that you've already done this since you are here watching this, but a couple things I do want to talk about is the different types of people within a team, as we call it, or within your account. When you created an account within Domotz, you actually created the team master account. Okay, so that team master has the ability to manage the whole team, deal with billing. So you'll insert your credit card through this, but the team master, and similarly to the team members, they have the ability to view all the agents that are being deployed on the networks that you're monitoring. Where it gets to be a little bit different is the introduction of what we call a field operator. A field operator can be set up to only access very specific agents that you deploy on the network. So keep these three types of users in mind when you are creating an account. We definitely see that 90+% of people using Domotz will, they'll have a team master as well as team members, and they'll use field operators sparingly or as needed for certain types of situations that they run into. Couple things I'll say: when you create the account or when you add team members, it's really you're using the email addresses for your individual team members. We're always asking for a particular type of password. We ask that it's a strong password, but more importantly, the thing that I want you to be aware of is the fact that you can, let me get into Domotz here, but set up you can set up two-factor authentication, and you can set up services like single sign-on or SAML. In fact, in the team management section here, when you click on the left side of the Domotz application here, you'll see that we bring up a browser for you. And then here you can see the different team members you have. You can see whether two-factor authentication is required or not. I definitely and highly recommend you use that. But then also I want to talk a little bit about where you set up your 2FA and single sign-on. So under your account, under portal.domotz.com, and under the account section in the far right, you'll see that you can set up 2FA for the account that you're on, or you can set up, if you're the team master, team members, here you can set up single sign-on through the various services that we have. Just so you know, I invite you to go to help.domotz.com where you can get exact information about how to set up these particular services. And if there is a particular SAML-based service that you use that you don't see listed here, send a note to support@domotz.com and we will look at how we can get that integration working there. I'm assuming a lot of you understand SAML and SSO and the importance of it, so I'm not going to go into great details here, but I do highly recommend you implement either 2FA at a minimum or one of these services. Let's talk about, since I'm on this page here, let's talk a little bit about account information and branding. In fact, you'll notice on the desktop application, I've got my logo up here on the desktop app. If you go to the account info and branding, it's going to open up that portal again. It's going to go to your account page, but here's where you can start to set up your info and your branding. Why is this important? Well, from an account info perspective, this is where you as a team master, you really set up the information about who you are, your phone number, and then also details about your credit card and payment. We'll talk a little bit about that soon. But you can get history about that. But I think what's more important is really the branding section. Domotz gives you the ability to create customized reports for you and your team, or even directly for your customer. We want your customer to be aware that it's you and your company that's entering this information. So this is where you can set up your email information for your company, your phone number. You can put your logo. This is the type of information that shows up in your accounts. When it comes to your contact information, whether it's your address or however you want people to get in touch with you, you can add that information here. And these details will show up not only in this NOC or Network Operations Center screen that we have viewed here, but it will also show up in the reports that you generate when you go to the reports section. We're going to talk more in more detail about reports, mostly in the 201 class. But there's a lot of information here that when you're generating reports comes along with this account info and branding. Let's talk a little bit about the billing details since we were on that page. So why do I bring this up? Well, Domotz being a cloud-based service, we want you to enter your credit card information here. Makes it a lot easier. You're going to be getting invoices based off of your billing cycle. Couple things I want to point out about the billing cycle. First of all, when you sign up for Domotz, you do a 21-day free trial. You can enter your credit card information at any point in that time, assuming you're continuing with Domotz. The billing date starts on that 22nd day, so the day after your trial expires. We will not bill you before that. It gives you the full 21 days to try it. So even if you insert your credit card on day 2, we won't actually start your billing cycle until that specific day, the 22nd day after you started the trial. We get a lot of questions on that, so I wanted to make sure you know about that. The other thing that I want to say is that when you install agents and you're in an active billing period, your agents are not prorated. Okay, your agents, if you activate it during your billing cycle, you will be charged for that month. And then we bill in advance. So on the date of your billing cycle, all of the agents that are active during that time will be billed for that next month. And so, if you have 10 agents, you'll be billed, 10 times the $19 per month for those agents. And then if you add a new agent during that month, you'll see that charge for that month show up on the next billing statement plus that. So if you go from 10 to 11 during a month, it'll be that next bill that you see the 11th agent actually being charged. So I wanted to make sure I described that because we do get a lot of questions about that. And it's one of the fundamental things about how Domotz works as a software as a service tool for you. Let's talk about agent activation. Now that we've talked about creating your account and setting that up, When you first created the account, you probably noticed that you went directly to this page about getting the Domotz agent. This agent is the piece of software that gets activated on the network and is actually scanning and monitoring that network at the instruction of the cloud. Many different types of agents. This is one of the nice things about Domotz. We give you the flexibility to install an agent on different types of not only operating systems, but also pieces of hardware. You know, by far the easiest way to deploy Domotz is actually through a Windows machine. Whether you're running Windows 10 or a Windows Server, you can download a Domotz agent and install it directly on that. You also, if you're familiar with Linux and you have Linux servers out there, you by all means can put a Domotz agent on many different types of Linux machines. You can put them through Dockers, you can run them on Ubuntu. If you have embedded systems, so if you have things like a Raspberry Pi, you can install a Domotz agent on that. We see Domotz getting installed a lot on Synology NAS drives, QNAP, even ReadyNAS drives out there. If you, and just to make those of you that may not be aware of it, Domotz does have a box. It's available on Amazon here for a little over $100. This box is essentially running Ubuntu Core on what I like to consider a hardened Orange Pi. We've modified this device so that it has a gigabit interface. It also, we got rid of the whole got rid of the SD card and put flash in there just so it's more robust. And in this agent, you know, you can purchase this, deploy it. The nice thing about this agent, and we'll talk more details about this in the 201 class, but in this case, Domotz owns the store that the Ubuntu Core is running on. Ubuntu Core is a little bit nicer when it comes to IoT-based systems. We can update not only the agent that's running, but we also can update the operating system. We also own the network interface card that's in that, so that gives us the ability to manage VLANs a little bit easier on that black box. Whereas if you're running on a Linux server or a Windows machine, you need to consider the fact that it's up to you to maintain the patches that are associated with that operating system. And when it comes to configuring that network interface card for different VLANs, you have to go in and manage that through the operating system. So those are just a couple things that I wanted to point out on the different types of agents that are out there. By all means, check out help.domotz.com. In fact, if I open up a new page here and go to help.domotz.com, you'll see when it comes to adding these agents right on the front, you'll see how you can do that with these different types of devices. When you activate the agent, so the thing that's important to note here, and I'm not going to go into great details here, but when you install that agent, it is going to open up the agent page. You'll want to log into that agent's IP address, and you'll want to log into port 3000, which is where we have the credentials for it. All of this is discussed in as user guides or even on the black box in the instruction manual for that. You'll see this again. But when you log in there, you're going to use your username and password that you created for your, whether you're a team member or a team master. You'll use that, and then the Domotz agent will activate itself with your account in the cloud, and that's when it starts to do all of its discovery and understanding of what's on that network. Of course, I would point out that I suggest, as you can see, these names that you give the agent are fairly important. In my case, I just have a bunch of random names and accounts that I'm sharing with others, so there's no solid naming convention. But I absolutely encourage you as a service provider to consider how you name the Domotz agent so that it's easy for you to sort and filter those out and understand the agents that you're looking at. Let's get into the details now about when an agent is activated, or after it's activated, what's the very first thing that happens? Well, the first thing is that Domotz will start to discover all of these devices that are on the network. We start to classify and configure those just like we discussed. The thing that you should be aware of is that the Domotz agent is only going to discover the devices and the network infrastructure that it sees on the network that it's associated to. If you have different VLANs, you should absolutely set those things up. Inside the devices tab, we talk about how to configure VLANs, so you can use that. And of course, I go back to help.domotz.com is your friend, and you can set that up. If you know that you have very specific subnets that you want to monitor with these particular devices, you can add those subnets here. You can name it. You can, if you had like say a security VLAN or a security subnet that was monitoring cameras, or say a point of sale system where you knew very specific IP addresses, you can do that. A couple things I'll say here about VLANs versus subnets. So Domotz is unique in the sense that we're actually doing VLAN scans or ARP requests to understand all the MAC addresses that are associated with a particular network. That gives us the ability to enrich and classify all these devices that we see on a network. When you are doing a subnet scan, you're actually looking at layer 3 rather than layer 2. So we're only going to provide you with IP address information that we're scanning. So it'll be up to you to enrich any information that comes on a subnet scan. Another thing that I will point out here is the ability for you to look at external hosts. So in fact, let's go to an agent here where I've configured some external hosts. On this particular network, I think I'm, looking at Blue Jeans. You can set up to look at things like Google DNS, Comcast, whatever you may care about for a service provider. You would want to set this up so that you're looking at servers or systems that you care about with respect to the agent on that network. In work from home environments, you want to make you may want to be monitoring your client's system that's running on their network, but be able to use Domotz to make sure that it can look back or see the performance associated with a particular network. In this case, we're just looking at Google DNS from the point of view of the agent. We're looking at things like latency and the performance from the point of view of the agent out to Google DNS. Extremely useful if you're dealing with things like Blue Jeans or some other service like Zoom. So keep that in mind as you set up that. So we've talked about how you can look at subnets. We've talked about how you can look at VLANs. We've talked about how you can look at external hosts as well. So all strong capabilities within Domotz as it relates to looking at the network itself. Oh, one thing that I do want to point out about the network infrastructure while we're here. When you are setting up devices, if you have changed your SNMP credentials associated with a particular device, you should go into those devices and set up the authentication. Now in my setup, just for demo purposes, I've left the public and private community strings on V2, or version 2 of SNMP. But if you are leveraging V3, or if you've at least changed the community strings for read or read write, by all means, you should go into the devices and apply that information. You do have, and we show more information about this in the 201 training, but I'll just point it out here that, for mine, I have Luxel devices. I can go in and find all the switches associated with my particular setup, and then I can change. Let's just select these devices here. I can go in and then configure the SNMP authentications all at one time across all my devices if I want to do that. You also have the ability when you're first setting it up within the agents to apply those changes to all the devices at one time. So keep that in mind. Let's go talk about device properties and the importance of these things. We'll just go ahead and use this switch here as an example. When I'm in Domotz, if I scroll down to the bottom, Domotz, as I mentioned, will do its best to not only look at what the MAC address is of these devices, we're going to capture any sort of application protocols that are being broadcasted by that device. We are going to show you its IP address, so this is where we look at that layer 3 level. We're going to discover any services that may have been available or may be available on that device, but we're also going to classify this device not only by the manufacturer, but also by the model. We're going to tell you the type of device that this is. But with any of these things, we're doing our best to discover this information, but if you have an obscure device on there, or you have a certain type of naming convention that you use within your company, you can come in and edit those properties easily on this info page. One thing that we can't do yet is discover the exact location, or zone as we call it, on this device. This is up to you. The reason you enter this information is that you can more easily filter these devices within a particular site that you may be monitoring. Of course, you can classify these devices as important or not. And then if you want to add it to your favorites because it's something that you always see, you can do that as well. So that gives you the idea about how to deal with a lot of these properties. These are probably the most important section when it comes to configuring these systems at the beginning. And again, when we get to the 201 class, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can manage these properties more globally across all of your agents. But for now, you at least have an understanding of how you can set these things up. One thing I want to mention while I'm in this device list section and we're talking about these properties, and this is kind of call it a tip and a trick to see here. We have the ability, when you go up to the menu system for this particular device, to generate an Excel file. We'll just save this to, I hope that went to my desktop. And let me open up Excel here on my laptop, and then I'll bring it up to the page so everybody can see it. We have the ability to export all of these devices that we've discovered to a spreadsheet. And then the power of this, and I'm opening this up on a different page, but I'll bring it up once I got it open here. You have the ability to come in and modify all of these properties to make it easier for you to go. It's opening, and then I'll bring it up on this screen. Okay. So all of these devices that have been discovered by Domotz have been brought into this spreadsheet. This is really useful for you. So if you wanted to search for all your cameras that were discovered in this, you now can see, okay, here's a list of cameras that I have. If I wanted to go in and modify the name of this particular camera, if I wanted to modify the location of this device, I can go in and do that. Even if I wanted to change its importance from false to say true on this, we can do that here. If I wanted to make notes about the password for this device or make some other notes important for your team members, you can do all that. You then can save that file back to the system, and then you can use the menuing system for this, and it'll show up in your menu on your desktop. You then can import this information back into the client by opening it up and bringing it in. So that's really the power of this being able to export this information. So I wanted to make sure you guys knew about that and how you can quickly set this up. So after Domotz has discovered all of these devices, and just doing a quick time check, and we look like we're in pretty good shape here. After Domotz has discovered all the devices, after you named them as you needed to, you've enriched them as you needed to, well, I should point this out too. You guys probably saw me utilizing this, but when we discover the network infrastructure, we also discover how all those devices that we've discovered are actually connected to this network. This is a pretty large network here, but you can see how we can create a network topology map of all these devices that are on the network. In fact, I can even use this to search for specific devices. So in this case, if I type the word camera, I can see all of the cameras highlighted here on this network. should have mentioned that earlier. You probably saw me use that, but part of the reason that we map all this is so that you have awareness of what's on this network, and it helps you with documentation purposes as well. You can export this map to a PNG or a scalable vector graphic, so you can save it into the documentation tools that you need, or do whatever you need to do with this. So a lot of times we see customers using this even as a sales tool when they're talking to new clients to say, hey, Mr. Customer, are you aware of all these devices that are associated to your network and what your system actually looks like? More often than not, people are surprised by the number of network-based devices that they have. Okay, another fundamental basic of Domotz is once we've discovered, classified, enriched all that data, it's really about that proactive monitoring. Under the Alerts tab, so within this Domotz UI, you can see where you can start to set up alerts. There are a couple different types of alerts that we should talk about. First and foremost, when it comes to alerts, we have network-based events that can cause alerts. Network-based events are things like the Domotz agent is no longer communicating with the cloud. That could be because of an ISP outage. It could be because of a power outage. It could be because somebody simply unplugged the cable to it. But the point is that the connection between the Domotz agent and the cloud is lost. We can do network-based alerts that are when new devices are discovered on the network. We talked about cybersecurity and awareness of what's on the networks. Domotz will alert you when a new device shows up on a VLAN or within a subnet that you're monitoring. We also can give you some what we call security alerts. So when we see ports being open from the outside in, and we go into more details on this in the 201, but it's just important for you to know that we can alert you when we see potential vulnerabilities to devices on the network. A lot of people want to know if their ISP changes. So we know a lot of service providers deal with customers that have redundant ISPs. When a particular network or ISP fails or gets dropped, the system should fail over to that new ISP. The only way you'll note that is if you have an alert set up and if you see something like an IP address change on that. And of course, if there's any LAN configuration changes, such as a DHCP name or whatever, you can see those types of alerts as well. Domotz does speed tests. In fact, you probably saw on this particular network here, we are dealing with network performance. I mean, Domotz will look at the historical values of your ISP, and we can set alerts on that. So if we see thresholds that are not where we want, or if we're seeing certain types of packets dropped on this, we can set alerts on that. And these are the different types of speed tests you can use. Things like MLab, FAST, we've found much more productive than services like Ookla, just because it's a true test of the actual network. I'll point out too, while I'm on this page, that when it comes to network changes, anything that changes on this particular page, we can get alerts to. I talked already about that public IP address. You also can do, within network speed tests, route analysis. So if you want to figure out how that Domotz agent is transversing through the network out to the ISP to a particular site, you can set that up here with Domotz as well, part of the troubleshooting tools that Domotz has. Okay, going back to types of alerts. So when we're in this alert, so those are the network alerts. The other types of alerts can be specific to devices. So when let's just pick a particular device here. We'll look at this video-based device. We can set up alerts within these devices such that if the device goes up or down, meaning that it falls offline, we can set alerts for that. We can look at an IP address changing. One thing I want to point out with heartbeat loss, so the way Domotz works, and we have a lot of engineering that went into this, Domotz will effectively ping or issue ICMP requests to devices. We can alert you if we get drops on that ICMP request. We also can, and this is what I would recommend you do, but we consider a device going down if we get multiple, meaning 3 or more groups of heartbeats where it's lost. So that'll be once every 2 minutes is the standard setting. You can go in and adjust that on particular devices as well. So you can see that we do a status check on these devices. You can change that to more than once every 2 minutes, which is really our default when we see that. So that's just something to be aware of. Let's go back. Oops, sorry, I was on that page already. We'll just go to this device. So when you are looking at these different types of alerts, so these are some of the basic alerts, but we can do more advanced alerts on devices as well. So we can set up what we call TCP service alerts. So we can look at something like a web page running on that device and whether it's working properly. We can set up SNMP sensors, which again, we go into a lot more detail in the 201 class, but we can look at temperature, CPU utilization, memory consumption. We also can look at network performance. So if we see packets getting dropped or latency on these particular devices changing significantly, we can set alerts for that. So those are the different types of events that will trigger alerts. Let's talk about how you can get alerts. We have this notion of what we call personal alerts. A personal alert is essentially an alert that goes to either the email address that you're logged into or a push notification to the mobile app where you're logged in. You can set those alerts up. So those are the most basic type of alerts. Where there's a lot of power within Domotz, it's within this thing called shared alerts. And again, we're going to go into great detail about shared alerts and how to set them up within Domotz, but what I will say quickly here is that under the left-hand side, you see the shared alerts and ticketing systems. The reason we call them shared alerts is because you have the ability to send a notification about an event to multiple contact channels. That can be a PSA tool, right? Your professional services administration tool, or a ticketing system. We can send it to messaging systems like Slack and Microsoft Teams. You even can send messages just to generic email alerts. And you can do multiple of these types of contact channels to a given type of alert that you set up. When you create that shared alert, you'll add those channels, you'll say which events should trigger that alert, and then you will associate those shared alerts to a given device on the network that you cared about. Okay, so that's just a very brief overview of the ability that you have within Domotz to not only discover all of these devices that are on the network, but then set up proactive monitoring for those. The last thing that I really want to focus on here in this particular training is how you can easily get in and connect to these devices. So once we've discovered all of the devices that are on the network, and again, I'll use this managed switch that's here, under the remote connections and VPN tab on your dashboard, you'll notice that Domotz has discovered all of the devices, but also all of the ports that are available for management of these devices. This is where you can get in and create those custom connections. And I say custom because if there's a particular port that you know goes to an HTTP or HTTPS, like a web-based protocol, you can set that up. The Domotz box, for instance, we mentioned that port 3000 is where you need to set up there. You can create an HTTP or HTTPS connection to those ports and then make that secure connection. When we've discovered these devices, or when you've just added that, you can easily just click on this connection. It will bring up a web page. You'll notice that it's a secure web page. This URL that's up here is unique to my laptop. Hopefully I entered the right password. But when I then create that connection, what this has done is it's created effectively a connection between my laptop and the cloud. And the cloud has created another secure connection that goes from the cloud back into the agent, which is then communicating with that device on the network. At this point, I can go in and adjust configurations. I can go in and do things like save off my running config or whatever it is I need to do. I can do firmware updates. I can get in and manage that particular device. So this is really easy to do with a network switch, with a firewall, with any device that has these types of connections out there for you. Another type of connection, if I'm using third-party tools to manage devices, so often used in security spaces when dealing with cameras. It can be used in the automation space when it comes to integration systems, things like Crestron, Extron, AMX. You can create a TCP tunnel. A TCP tunnel will open up a direct port to a particular it'll create a direct connection to a particular port, and then it gives you a URL that you can then use in that third-party tool. So you can take and copy this to your dashboard and insert that into the tool, or you can use some redirect scripts to redirect that to the local machine if that's what is needed to be done. I'll close this connection. One other thing I want to show is while everything that I showed here creates a direct connection from your laptop to a device on that network, you also, through Domotz, can turn the agent into a VPN host. So I'm not going to do it here since we're on this webinar, but I do have the ability to turn the agent that's residing on that network to a host. I can then use my software of choice, whether it's something like OpenVPN or TunnelBlick. I can then take the configuration file that the Domotz agent gives me, and I can load that up into this VPN client, and then I can create a VPN connection. We call it VPN on demand to that particular site. The benefit of this is now my laptop is acting like it's directly on that network, so I have all of the capabilities of what a standard VPN connection does, but I'm using the Domotz infrastructure, including things like the team management side of it, so the single sign-on services, and I have the ability to then diagnose and debug any issues that may be running on that network as if I was on site. Okay, so this gives you a basic overview of a lot of the power within Domotz. It really gets you kind of the fundamentals of not only activating the agent, discovering the devices, naming the devices, being able to set up alerts on those devices. We talked a little bit about team management and how you deal with that. We also talked about the remote connections. So we're going to talk in more detail in the 201 class about the reporting and logging, the benefits of that, and why you should be using that with your customers. We're going to talk a lot more detail about network diagnostics and performance and how to take advantage of round trip delay to better debug systems that you're monitoring. We'll talk a lot about managing all of your agents at one time here, how you can do that, how you can create templates on a particular site or system and then deploy those templates across to all of your agents. We're also going to go in a lot more detail about sensors. So in particular, like when we look at certain types of devices, let's find one that's actually configured here. So this is a network-based temperature sensor, but we'll talk about how you discover the OIDs that are associated with that, and then how you can set up alerts on these when you're looking at SNMP. We're also going to go into some of the newer features that you're going to see here in the next couple of months, which is around monitoring dashboards. Being able to bring very specific devices into a single dashboard and then associate, be able to monitor those devices with SNMP sensors or information that that we've discovered. And then lastly, the thing that we're going to talk about in the 201 session is the ability to associate external services with the systems that are deployed. So if you're using things like Unify with Ubiquiti, or you're using Meraki for your wireless access points, or even the managed switches, they have external services which need to be configured, and we'll talk about that. think I have that under this particular site. I think we have Meraki external services that show up in here. Yeah, configuring these external services. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, all that being said, I think, and Giancarlo, I'd like to understand, it looks like we got a couple of questions here. Do we, are there questions that would be pertinent to ask and that we can answer here? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very good, JP. You covered most of the stuff, even some stuff that has been requested during the presentation. You covered after, like the differences between personal alerts and shared alerts, which is great. And in the same topic of alerts, and something that goes more in the 201, Cliff, but also another user asked, how can I make sure to, let's say, configure alerts cross agents or cross device? And you mentioned that we will cover this during the 201, but basically it's inside the manage functionality. So that's where you, yeah.
I mean, just to quickly give an overview, which this is kind of a fictitious site, but if I wanted to select multiple of these devices under the Manage tab, here's where I can go in and then configure shared alerts or set up standard alerts within these devices. I do need to make sure that I'm owning these though. But
very good, very good. That's exactly what it was asked there. One thing that was asked from an MSP is more in the range of the how to make sure that I'm making backups of configuration files from networking appliances, and that's again something that we will cover more in the 201. But basically, Domotz does already great job with Cisco devices, WatchGuard, Sonic Wall, FortiGate, and Juniper, and other branch. We just added HP Aruba in that instance. We basically connect to device, retrieve the configuration file, and archive in a sort of backup that you can review every single time you want. You can get notification if something changed, and of course, you can roll back to a previous version if something goes wrong.
Which I do like that feature, Giancarlo. I mean, the way that we can roll back if something doesn't appropriately get set is really a powerful tool.
Yeah. Very good, JB. I think that's everything. Of course, there is a lot of stuff coming in the next few weeks, new things, new menu, new areas of development. So it will be interesting.
One thing that I brought up the wrong agent. One thing I wanted to show Giancarlo, just as some of the more advanced features of Domotz while we're here. You know, we talk about being able to discover all of the devices on the network, and I showed these cameras, but just to let people know, you know, if you're a service provider, you know, your clients likely have a security system. They've got access control systems for the doors. They also have cameras. One of the added values that Domotz does is not only can we tell you that the camera is online, but we give you the ability to grab a snapshot from this camera. So we're effectively taking advantage of the OnViv protocol that these security cameras have, and we're able to capture the images from that. This is really valuable for you because not only, like I said, are you seeing that the camera's online, but now you can show the customer that it's functioning properly. And we have a lot of webinars that talk about how you can generate reports with this and pull the API information from these devices and get this info into a nice PDF. So I wanted to make sure people saw that as a feature. The other thing is when it comes to service provider, or excuse me, when it comes to commercial integrators, which we have quite a few of as well, you know, we can look at video systems. We can see how the encoders are communicating with the decoders over the network. We can do things like draw topology maps if I was looking at the right system, but we can see which devices are actually connected and how that video distribution system is actually functioning. So those are just some of the power that we have within Domotz as well. All right,
very good.
Top of the hour. This has been recorded, so if you guys want to go back to it, we'll make it available on our website. If you're dying to get into the 201 class, that is also recorded and on our website as well from previous sessions. We'll be doing another 201 session here in 2 weeks. So if you are new to Domotz and want to understand more about that, by all means, please check us out there at that time. Giancarlo, thanks for getting to some of those questions. I also thank the team that answered a lot of the questions that we got on the back end. We appreciate that. We look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Thank you so much and have a great day.